make-believe guns, and we had dying animals along the pathway so you could watch decay each day, and we had meditations on death, and we just worked through all of our kind of romanticism about death so that we could all sit with eyes open and heart open and mind quiet and live together. And we spent 3 days crying and wailing over the individual grief of the 150 people there in each of the retreats, and people whose sons had committed suicide or whose husbands had died or who were dying. And I was just awash in the immensity and power of the moment and the human process and our ability to get clear and straight behind the whole issue of death, that we just are so scared to take it on, we don't know how to deal with it, even without knowing what the future holds. You know, at the same moment, I have such a deep conviction about that we are not our bodies, that we are just in our bodies, that I find the whole thing very playful, because I also have a sense of reincarnation in terms of the vastness of the game and the kind of trivial nature of a human life and the preciousness of it at the same moment. So now, as far as me personally, I can't tell. I mean, you never know. I know that when I get to something where I might die, like some crisis, I notice that now, I used to have, I'd sweat or I'd fear. Now I have sort of curiosity, which is still an attachment. I don't have the fear. Oh, isn't this going to be interesting? It looks like I've just blown it, like the car goes into a skid or something like that, you know. But I'm not ready yet to just be Ram, you know, not just so perfectly clear. I mean, I thought of Ben Bentoff when he, you know, in that plane, and I wondered,
because people may not know.
Well, he was an extraordinarily beautiful kind of New Age consciousness, and he was in the crash in that Chicago plane that went down recently. And after all, there were maybe 3 or 4 seconds that there was a consciousness, and where his consciousness was at that moment is hard. I thought of myself in that situation, and I don't know whether I would have gotten my Ram going in time in that round. I really don't. I mean, I think the confusion would have caught me off guard. I don't think I'm ready yet. I mean, I may be taken unready, and I'll just go on more births. I'll go on more births anyway, but I can't tell where I'm at about it at all. I really don't know. A few years ago, I took an LSD trip in which I became afraid I had taken bad acid and I was going to die. And then I thought, well, how else could I die than running out to the police? And I thought that every way I thought of existing, sooner or later I would die, because what was going to die was the thought of who I was. This is very esoteric philosophy, but I'll slip it in anyway. And so I finally turned to the picture of my guru and I said, Maharaji, let me die. And I experienced the thought form slowing down until the space between the thoughts got bigger and bigger, and finally I just went into one of the spaces. And I wasn't. And then the next thought I had was, well, you can be anything you want this time around. And I realized, and it was bittersweet, because I knew I had just reincarnated. My karma had reasserted itself, and I just come back into life. But I said, I just died. But then I realized that that's what enlightenment is. That enlightenment is the end of self-consciousness, in which you just become Dharma, or you just become the universe. Do you hear what I'm saying? And I think most people don't know that the enlightenment issue is about that. I mean, when I just taught a weekend up in New York State at the Abode, and when I said to the group, you realize that what we're working on is our own psychological death, they didn't want to hear it. People did not want to hear that. And yet nirvana is the absence of separate self-consciousness. And I think that the game is much more profound than most people are ready yet to acknowledge.
We have to stop now.
We have to stop.
All right. Ram Dass, it's almost time for us to stop now, but I'd like to ask you, what is really important to you at this time? What is the really important thing that you're working with, or the important issue, either the work on yourself or the external work? And I don't see any separation in those, so I guess they're just together. What is that for you?
Well, it very much is the integration of those things. And recently I joined a project called the Seva Foundation, which is a project to cure unnecessary blindness in the world. It turns out 80% of the blind in the world is unnecessary. It's curable or preventable. most of it's in the third world countries, by things like salve, or, like there are 60,000 blind people in India who are just waiting for they're blind, and there's no seeing eye dogs, so they're really blind. I mean, they're really dysfunctional. They're waiting for a cataract operation, which the clinics can do in 4 minutes and costs $5. Okay? So, now, here's the point of what's important to me. I have had acid trips and I've meditated, and most of you that are listening have had meditation or have had experiences in which you have felt, one way or another, you felt the unity of all beings. You felt like we are a family, like it's only us in the universe. And I know that to be true on one plane of consciousness. But on the plane I live on every day, I still act as if those blind people and the boat people off the coast of Thailand and the people starving in Bangladesh are all somehow them. When I take $5 out of my wallet to go see a movie, my consciousness doesn't include the blind person in India who could, with that $5, regain a life of sight. Because if that was my father or my brother or my wife or my child or my cousin or my second cousin or my cousin's friend, I would immediately give up the $5. But somehow there was a point at which it became so abstract it became them. And my game is to figure out, and to have the courage to figure out how to live in a way so it's only us. Because I understand that the reason people come down from their highs is because they have habits of living in which they deny the truths they know at the higher levels. And I am determined to figure out how to, and it's very scary. I've got a van with a nice stereo system. Does that have to go? Does it mean I'm supposed to live like the boat people or not? It may not, because when you listen to your karmic predicament, I know that I'm an American. I'm in a position, we are in the position where we have affluence, we have leisure, we have a whole opportunity to work on ourselves to bring consciousness to humankind that it badly needs. It needs wisdom instead of knowledge. It needs all these kinds. It needs love instead of kindness. It needs a whole lot of different kinds. It needs compassion above, all of that. And we can bring that through standing on the shoulders of our technology, of our affluence and all, not denying it. So I don't think it means giving up everything and living as Simone Weil did, as the poorest worker, And yet I've got to be able, when I spend $5, to be able to look in the eyes of the blind person, in a sort of a pun way. I've got to be able to look in the eyes of the boat people and say, yes, I'm spending this $5 this way because this is my part in the whole thing, right? Even if it's to a movie, because I need to do that with my consciousness. I've just got to bring it all together somehow. Okay? And I think that maybe lots of us want to do that now and are doing it. And I think that's the work we're all about. And I just want to tell everybody that I love you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to ramdas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. Welcome to Ramdas Here and Now, and I'm Raghu Marcus, and I haven't been here for a couple of weeks because we just came back from Maui, where we had this wonderful retreat, Open Your Heart in Paradise, with Ramdas Krishnadas, Sharon Salzberg, Mirabai Bush, and others, including our special guest, K.K. Shah, who, as some of you know, or many of you know, was with Ramdas when he first met Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba in the foothills of the Himalayas, and was his first translator and host. Maharaji sent him right over to his house to experience Indian family, which we had a nice discussion about at the retreat. Some of that is up on ramdas.org for those of you who want to take a look. There's some kind of a scrapbook of some of the events and some of the talks and some of the kirtan and so on from Krishnadas. So unfortunately, that did prevent me from moving on doing these last couple of weeks podcasts, which I miss. So here we are back at it, and found something really incredible. Another incredible podcast talk from Ramdas. This took place, I think it was in England. It sounds like it because the person who is asking the questions, it's with an audience, and it had the subject of it is personality and emotions, and she has an English accent, so I'm thinking that's where it is from. And this is really key material. I mean, it's just really incisive material, and I'm really happy I found these. The basis of everything, as far as I'm personally concerned, is when people ask, oh, so what are you doing this life? What's this all about for you? Going to the East and finding a guru and all that. It's about, you're going to get enlightened, you know? And I always say, I haven't the slightest idea about enlightenment. I really don't. The only idea I have is about getting free of all of the things that separate me from everyone around me. And the idea that if I get somewhat free, then I can hopefully make some sort of positive contribution to this world. And that's what's important to me. Obviously, within all of that is to have that presence of Maharaji, of my guru, with me as much as possible. And that's a question of, obviously, grace is a big part of that, and my karma. But at the same time, it's doing the things that I know can help. And in this particular, so that commitment to be free, that's the basic quotient here. And in this particular talk, Ramdas covers a few different subjects. One of them is emotions and how you can use them, and another is talking about anger, which is especially prominent for me. This is something that I've had an issue with my whole entire life. It's kind of almost been passed down to me. My father had an issue with it, and as we do, we pick up stuff from our parents. So now Ramdas talks about, as he mentions in this talk, that Maharaji told him in particular, give up anger, over and over and over. Give up anger. Not an easy thing to do. And so he talked about, Ramdas talked about anger as it's closely related to righteousness, because you get angry when you think somebody else is wrong and you are right. And that sense of being wronged by another person is a tremendous hurdle to get over, and they do say, as he mentions in the ancient scriptures, that being right is one of the last obstacles to getting into the inner temple. And Ram Dass illustrates, actually he doesn't quite mention the story, but there's a couple of stories, and I'll mention them. We might have passed them, we might have, talked about them in previous podcasts. But again, Maharaji really all the time used to talk about giving up anger. I mean, it was a major theme. And he would say it, and it wouldn't, there wasn't anything like go meditate 50 hours over in that hill, and, nothing like that. It was just simply give it up. One day we were in a building next door in the ashram in Khenchi, the foothills, and we could see out the window where Maharaji used to sit in the front part of the ashram. We were in the back. And a few of us were sitting there, and Ram Dass happened to be, we heard this screaming going on, and we knew it was Maharaji. And Ram Dass looked out the window, and Maharaji was absolutely excoriating somebody. He was screaming at them. I mean, he looked like the angriest person that ever lived. I mean, this guy was shaking like a leaf. And Ram Dass got really upset and was like, ran down there. I mean, I don't think he ran down right away. I don't quite remember the sequence, but it was soon after. And he said, "You say to give up anger? Meanwhile, you've been screaming at this guy, and so on." And Maharaji said to him, "You can be angry at somebody, but you cannot throw them out of your heart." And Ram Dass in this talk talks about the kind of anger where it's coming from love and equanimity, where it serves that person, and you are not separating yourself out. Now, that's a highly difficult state to get into, but it's worth pondering. And turns out that the guy that he was yelling at, his name was Sharma, poor guy. He actually was, I don't know what, he was doing something about potato. Either he let them rot because he wasn't taking care of it properly, or he might have even been shifting a few potatoes out the door of the back there for a couple of shekels. Something like that. And the incident that Ram Dass was talking about was when he came to the temple in the foothills, Khenchi, and he had walked from the local town nearby, about a 15-mile walk, and we were all there eating, and across the courtyard from Maharaji. He was sitting there, and we were eating, and then Ram Dass showed up, and one of us, one of the satsang, Western satsang, gave Ram Dass a plate of food. This is a famous story that's been told over and over, but in this particular lecture, I don't think he actually tells it. But what happened was he was so angry, Ram Dass, at all of us for what he called our adharmic behavior. In other words, pretty much selfish behavior. And he threw the plate right in the face of this guy. And, you can't do any worse than throwing food at anybody in India. And of course, it was right in front of Maharaji. And so he again reinforced in Ram Dass and in us that you had, that to give up anger day by day by day, and that he would help. And Ram Dass talks a lot of very incisive stuff about anger, and we are all in that same place. I'm sure that every one of us, every one of you listening, and myself way included, when you get angry, you're pushing away somebody. I mean, that immediately creates a divide. When you push away at something, it separates you. It defines who you are not. and you identify with that, it's a tremendous negative. Whenever you hold on to anger, even if you're right, you just end up cutting yourself off. And in this thing, at one point, Ram Dass says it was just too painful to be right, even though he was right in certain circumstances. It was costing more than it was worth, he says. And herein lies, when you have a commitment to getting free, that cost becomes way too much, and you start to do the things that are necessary to get free of, in this case, anger. Now, I've had some improvement, I will say, in my attachment to anger over the years, just by doing some practices. I mean, Ram Dass talks here about he does his mala. When he sees himself starting to separate from an individual, he steps back, he stops, he gets into a silent place, and he does his mala, rosary, Ram, Ram, Ram. Do your mantra. Do whatever it is. Take a breath. Do a yoga asana. Whatever it is that cuts that moment off where you're going to follow that anger. And usually anger, when you get angry about one thing, you pour tons of frustrated stuff from your past into it. At least that's something that I am well familiar with. But I must say, after years of practice and so on, I am way more able to catch that place where the tipping point of falling off the edge into that anger, which completely, utterly separates you from that other person. And, and it's all reactive. We're just reacting, to what's outside coming in. It's not our natural state. And you can think of this as with what's going on in the world today as more than an individual thing. It's something of states, of countries, of governments, and the way that they act. When I was one last little tidbit, when I was at the retreat, just hanging out with my wife Saraswati and Sharon Salzberg, and she was telling us, because she's been closely associated with Burma through meditation trainings and so on, and people she knows over there. She was really closely following President Obama when he went over and to that area, and he talked about, at one point, the tradition of metta that exists there. Loving kindness, that's metta. That's such an important teaching that Sharon, by the way, Sharon Salzberg, SALZBERG.com, who's an absolutely wonderful proponent of loving kindness meditation. And I just was so happy when she told us that, God knows that President Obama, hasn't fulfilled maybe everybody's desires, and maybe it's not so possible in this country for any president to do that. But just the fact that he's aware of loving kindness is incredible. And that is certainly an antidote to anger, that practice. So highly recommend it. And so take a listen. Here we are. Ram Dass, Here and Now.
Question.
How can we use our emotions positively on our spiritual path?
How can we use our emotions positively on our spiritual path? If you look at the practice of what's called devotional yoga, or bhakti yoga in Hindi, devotional yoga, you will see that you, for example, if your relationship is to, say, Christ, You could take a picture of Jesus and then think about the qualities of his life and the qualities of his compassion and the qualities of his beauty of being and the qualities of his reminding people about God. And you could look at that being, and it would generate in you, if you allow it, emotional responses. These emotional responses are relational. They are warm human responses of love, of caring, of tenderness. Then if you stay with that picture of Jesus and keep being with Jesus, you will go beyond those into a deeper way of being with him, of just being with him in the presence sense. And that presence includes more and more of all of what is, all emotions all at once. But you go through the emotional doorway. You use your emotional heart as a vehicle to getting into that deeper way of being with God. Okay, that's one way. The other kinds of emotions that are generated, emotions like anger, sadness, joy, all of them, the whole range of them. What one cultivates is a spaciousness or an awareness that allows you to acknowledge the feelings, and it comes back to the word appreciating again. Acknowledge the feelings and allow them and see them as part of the human condition. They're all generated. They're like thought. They're subtle thought forms. Emotions are really subtle thought forms. And they all arise in response to something. They're reactions that come. If somebody goes like that, you have a certain emotional response. If they go like that, you have a different response. If they go like that, you have a different response. And you can feel how reactive your emotions are to situations. They're all part of a lawful reactive domain that you keep cultivating a quietness in yourself that just watches these things coming and going and arising and passing away. And you learn not to act out your emotions, but just to appreciate and allow them. That's part of the way in which you use them spiritually. Spiritually, you don't act out your emotions. You just acknowledge them. You don't deny them, though. You don't push them down. You acknowledge that I'm angry, but you don't have to say, hey, I'm angry. That's different. But you acknowledge it. You don't deny it. That's the key thing. So the way you would use emotions is in devotional practices, you aim them towards God. And for the other kinds of emotional realms, you witness them and you sit with them and you watch them change and come and go, and don't deny them and allow them, because that's part of your human condition. I mean, when we talk about service, you will see how we deal with suffering. And you'll see that it awakens intense emotions, and your heart is breaking, and you have to let your heart break. But you've cultivated another plane of reality, which is one that notices and allows it, a quality of equanimity that lies with it. So emotions work best when you also have another plane that is not emotional going simultaneously with it, actually. Because just getting lost in your emotional reactivity just digs your hole deeper of karma. You know? But allowing your humanity, that's really part of it. Allowing your humanity, yes. It's it's an interesting and delicate line to acknowledge that you feel, say, somebody says something and it hurts you, and then you feel hurt. To acknowledge that you feel hurt, the question is, they did what they did because that's what they did. That's their problem. You reacted the way you reacted because that's the way you reacted. That's your problem. Right. To interpret that your feeling is their problem is when you start to feel you have to tell them that you were hurt by what they said. The other thing is, if I'm hurt by what you say, that's something for me to work with. I acknowledge it and then I work with it. I don't have to get them to not do the thing because they're just being like a tree. They're just phenomena happening. This is not psychological, relational stuff we're talking about. We're talking about spiritual stuff now. We're talking about how you get out from under it, not how you keep digging it deeper. Do you understand? And most people don't want to hear this. I mean, I'm playing on thin ice now and I'm an old psychologist, and I used to wallow in this stuff. So I'm really telling you that if you get me mad, that's my problem. And that changes relationships, as we will see when we get to the relationship group. Okay. We'll leave it now for the relationship group, because that'll come up a lot in the relationship group. I'm absolutely sure about it. Okay, let's go on. Next one.
Next question is about anger. When your guru told you to drop anger, what did this mean? And is it something we all need to do?
The question is about anger. How do you deal with anger? And when my guru said, give up anger, how to interpret that? Now, anger usually is intimately related to righteousness. You'll notice that when you get angry at somebody, it is because you feel you have been wronged and you have a sense of right. Right? And it is said in the spiritual literature that righteousness and being right is one of the last gates to the inner temple. It's one of the last obstacles to getting in the inner temple. And that one of the problems of spiritual work is ending up being a good yogi. You are a really good yogi. You know all the shlokas, you know all the positions, you do it all perfectly right. And you are really righteous and good, but you're not free. And it's called the golden chain, the chain of righteousness. And you certainly see that in most religious traditions, that the priest class gets very caught in being good, in being right. And freedom lies behind good and evil. It lies behind right and wrong. It's the one that lies behind the two. It goes behind all polarities. When you want to become free, then your righteousness and your anger are much less interesting than they used to be. You less feel comfortable just sitting in your righteousness than you do in throwing it back into the pot in order to become free. And what my guru was saying to me was, become free. Let go. And he wasn't saying, work it out. He was just saying, let it go. Now, when I was angry at all those people at the temple, I was right about every one of them. I mean, there was no doubt about it. They were irresponsible, sloppy. I had a reason for every one of the 34 people that I was angry at, 30-some-odd people. They were all inadequate to the situation. And he said to me, let go. He said, I told you to love everyone. And I said, yes, but you told me to tell the truth, and the truth is I don't love everyone. And he said, love everyone and tell the truth. Now, that's interesting, because that's like, it's putting two things together that don't go together. But they don't go together from where I'm standing. So what he was saying to me was, when you finish standing where you think you are, in which they don't go together, you will end up standing in a place where they go together, right? Where the truth is you love everyone. And that was incomprehensible to me, because I looked over and I hated all these people. But as I looked at them with his words in my heart and mind, I looked and I saw that I hated their actions, but right behind that, if I just shifted my gaze just a little bit, they were all souls caught in their own stuff, which led them, their fears, which led them to do thises and that's, and led me to do thises and that's in judgment. And right behind it were these beautiful, pristine souls that I loved very dearly. And so I flicked my gaze, and I looked and I saw that I loved them. And I was angry at actions, but not at beings. I also saw that anger is divisive. Anger keeps, when you're angry, you push against something. When you push against something, it separates you. It defines what isn't you. And yet I understood that where I'm going to is a place which embraces the universe and experiences the unity of all things. So that every time I held on to anger, even if I was right, I ended up cutting myself off. And I had lived years and years with a heart that was closed and tight and cut off. And I could feel it affecting my body. It affected everything about my life. I was so alienated from life by my anger and my righteousness and my judgment, which came out of my own sense of inadequacy. Can you hear that issue? It may be familiar to some of you. And what I then realized was that it was too painful to be right. It was costing me more than it was worth. And that I wanted to be part of the flow of the universe rather than to be sitting in judgment of it. And that the anger was not going to get me to God. I heard what he was saying. And he said, give up a little anger each day and I'll help you. And I started to respond that when anger arose, instead of cultivating it and, fertilizing it and watering it and feeding it, I just said, the hell with it. It's not going to get me where I really want to go. It's a way station along the way, but it's not going to get me there. And even though I'm right, I'm going to give it up. Because I looked and I saw as we'll see in politics, which we're going to discuss in a few minutes, I saw in politics the way in which anger was divisive and it polarized people. And I saw that you had to be able to oppose people without anger. And that anger was not necessarily a functional commodity. And that I could just let it go. And it was hard because there was pride involved. Because I was right. And he didn't say work it out. He didn't say sit down and you say, well, I was a little wrong, and you say, well, I was a little wrong, and then everybody feels better. That wasn't what he said. He said, give it up. He didn't say work it out. And I realized that went counter to my whole psychological training. But I decided that I wanted to be free, and I just give it up. And it's been very difficult, extremely difficult, because often the people that I am angry at are, I'm really right. And then I realized that I am not free, and I want to be free. And so I let it go. And if they've done stuff that is inappropriate, that's their problem. My job is to keep my heart open, because if my heart is open, they can change that much faster. I don't have to sit in judgment. I don't have to play God with everybody around me. And so I have practiced letting my anger go. And I would say that I have about 1/10 of the anger I had 15 years ago. I was a very angry person, very judgmental and very angry, and held grudges. And I would say I don't have those anymore. I think there are maybe a couple of people that I have stuff to work out with at this moment. That I have stuff where I'm holding something. And it's very painful to me, and I see that I have to let it go. People that I've worked very closely with, where I feel that I've gotten caught in my own judging mind. And that's my problem, and I've got some work to do. I don't see it as something what I'm right any longer. I just see it as a problem. Okay? I can see. We'll just take a couple of questions and go, yes? Now, there is an anger that comes that's called dharmic anger. The only kind of anger that is appropriate is when you love another person so much that the anger is come as a device for liberating them out of your love. If you're identified with your anger, forget it. You've got to assume his love for all these people was so intense that he was doing that as a teaching, and that was all part of the storyline. You know? Because if he hadn't done that, the rest of the story wouldn't have happened. I mean, that's the part of it that's always tricky, you know, because you want to make it into a melodrama. But, I mean, Christ needed Judas just as, you know, I mean, everybody was necessary for the story. Excuse me. Yes. Yeah, well, anger, you've got to watch that anger comes out of judgment. And you can say that something is inappropriate and do something to stop it. The question is whether the anger is a correlate that's useful or not. And it is only useful, I think, when it is rooted in love and equanimity. When the anger is an intentional emotional response that you use as a teaching device out of your love and equanimity. When you're caught in it, I think it's divisive. All right? It's a strong way of saying that. Yeah, last one. About what? Dharmic anger. That's what I just said again. Anger that comes out of love and equanimity. When I love you so much, like in Tibetan Buddhism, there are stories of the guru who keeps beating the student and keeps frustrating him and being very angry and irritable. And actually, that wasn't the guru at all. That was merely a functional behavior that came out of the love and the wanting to liberate the other person. Right? It wasn't coming out of any real anger in the person. There was no hatred in it. The anger came out of compassion. It came out of love. To liberate the other person from whatever they were stuck in. But that's a very delicate relationship. That's very rare that one is in that role to do that, right? I mean, you can be as angry as you want as long as you love enough. Because if you love enough, the anger is a very different kind of anger. I mean, there are times when you act strongly. Like when you study parent-child relationships, you will see that when the love between the child and the parent is strong enough, the parent can use anger, the anger can arise, and it doesn't threaten the love. It comes out of such intense love. On the other hand, there are other kinds of parent-child relationships where the parent gets so lost in their anger that the love is lost. That has an entirely different effect on the child. Then the child feels very insecure. The other way, because we used to do studies to determine whether spanking a child affected their development. Turned out spanking isn't a variable that makes any difference at all. It depends on whether you spank with love or you spank with withdrawal of love. You can hear that. Next question.
Ramdas.
Yes.
We're going to start with fear.
Fear.
Fear, yes. And we're quite a frightened group, so we'd like the support of everybody to be courageous enough to ask our questions. Emmanuel says that fear is the only issue, and it became apparent for all of us in our group that we'd spent our whole life in a reactive dance of fear. And when we examined that, we realized that very often the thing we were frightened of wasn't nearly as frightening as the fear, and that it became the fear of the fear of the fear. And we wanted to try to understand what the fear is, what the thing is that we're so frightened of, and whether that energy is something that we can transform. Is it our friend? Is it our foe? And how practically can we deal with it as well as understanding it?
Okay. Well presented for a frightened person. Fear is the result of getting, how to say it, is getting caught in the middle. Buddha says it's the result of ignorance, and the ignorance is that when you start out as an infant with an undifferentiated awareness, and then you are taught who you are, that component, that structure, which we call ego, is a very fragile structure. It seems tough, but it's actually a very fragile structure, and it's a structure that is created of mind, of learned neural patterns, if you will, and it has on one side of it what Freud referred to as the id, or the impulse life, which the structure is designed to interface between the impulse life and the society, to protect the society from the impulse life. And on the other hand, it is this fragile structure in the face of tremendous forces externally, which are parents and then social institutions and chaos and storms and nature, all of it. So when you didn't have a framework, when you didn't have a somebodyness, you're just part of the universe and there's no fear. I mean, a tree isn't frightened and it's not clear. I mean, even like in one of the discussions that Emmanuel had about what a mouse feels like when it's being eaten by a cat, the question is the mouse saying, "Oh my God, I'm being eaten by a cat"? Or is it feeling warmth and moisture and shifts in energy? And is the squealing, do we project, we anthropomorphize and we say it's squealing because it's afraid. But to be afraid, one has to have a self-concept. And when an organism is functioning instinctually in a scene, each change in the homeostasis, each change in the balance of the situation is just a new moment. It's just a new moment to which it responds. And so, for example, we'll stay away from that one. It's very delicate to interpret things because we tend to interpret in terms of where we're sitting, and we've developed these structures, and if you can sense the way that works, just see on one side of you these extremely powerful impulses in you that you're afraid of, and on the other side the tremendous forces outside that you're afraid of, and feeling yourself as a very fragile entity within that structure. And so that the root of the fear is the separateness. The root of the fear is the model one has of oneself. That's where the fear starts. Once that exists, then you process everything from inside or outside in terms of that model, and it keeps reinforcing the feeling of vulnerability because, in fact, there are externally incredibly powerful forces outside and inside. The transformative process of spiritual work is reawakening to the innocence of going behind that model that one had that cut oneself off, that made oneself a tiny little fragile somebody. And a lot of the power preoccupations that we end up having, and especially the power of trying to leave something behind in the face of death, is the feeling of our own fragility. And if you look at social structures, you see how much social institution is based upon the feeling of fragility of the human condition. So, how you deal with fear, because you say, I'm afraid of that person. I mean, you say, I'm afraid of being socially shamed. But when you are socially shamed, it hurts, and then here we still are. You're afraid of violence, and then if violence happens, sure, it's scary and painful, and then behind it, here we are. And I think you presented it right, that often the fear feeds upon itself, and we're almost afraid of the fear, or the fear is the thing rather than what we're afraid of. We're just afraid. We're just afraid. We just feel very vulnerable. The ways of dealing with it. See, in a therapeutics tradition, what you usually do is try to figure out what you're afraid of. Another technique is this witness, which merely sits with the fear and tries to get it before it becomes so consuming that there's no space left. There's usually a little space left. The image I usually use is if you have a picture frame, you got a painting of a cloud, of a gray cloud against a blue sky, but you only had one picture frame and it was a little too small. So what you did was you bent the canvas around to frame it, but in doing so you lost all the blue sky. So you ended up with just a framed gray. Right? It fills the entire frame. So when you look around, you say, I'm afraid, or I'm depressed, or something. If you enlarged the frame so there was a little, even just a little bit of that kind of round thing of a cloud and a little blue space, you'd say, ah, a cloud, right? That's what the witness is. The witness is that tiny little blue over in the corner that leads you to say, ah, fear. I've talked about the woman calling me in the middle of the night many years ago. And she said, I've taken LSD and I'm going to commit suicide. And I'm going crazy. I've gone crazy. I'm going to commit suicide. She called me from California to New York State at 2 in the morning. So I got up and I said, yes, okay, you're going to commit suicide and you're crazy. And it's dawned on me, I said to her, look, you're obviously too mad to talk to. Could I speak to whoever it was that picked up the phone and dialed 7 numbers plus an area code to get me? Because whoever that is obviously got all their marbles, and I'd like to talk to that person. See? And in a way, that's the witness of the rest of it, see? Like, I'll dial him and tell him I'm mad, you know. It's like, and in a way, that's the little blue sky, and that's what we have in us all the time. Often we get so frightened, we can't stop for a moment to notice, there's fear, because it's consumed us. So the art is to keep cultivating that witness, continuously cultivating it in all the opportunities you have, so that it is present more and more of the time. At first it's there about 1% of the time, and all the rest of it's there 90%, 99% of the time. But over a while it gets so that it's there almost 50% of the time. And then as you start to go into these things, here comes fear, here comes depression again. And when you focus on the witness rather than on the fear,